Hey, church family, as you prepare to hear God's word this morning, I couldn't think of a better preacher to kick off this series of sermons during a month where you so graciously give me some time to rest, to pray, and to write. Andy Armstrong is our kids' pastor, and I love what he means to our children. I've asked him to come this morning to share with you not only from God's word, but his heart for the next generation. He and his lovely wife, Jen, have been a blessing to our church since day one, and he is a joy to serve beside. If you happen to be a guest, I know that you've already been welcome, but when you hear Andy's heart, you'll hear the reason why Church at the Mill continues to place a high priority on reaching the next generation. So sit back, open up your mind, open up your heart, open up your word, and welcome Pastor Andy Armstrong.
Good morning. It's nice to see you all this morning, and welcome. In the room today are people from all walks of life, some that originated here in Spartanburg and some that have moved here from around the country and around the world. There's senior adults here, there's retired people here, there's young parents here. There's people in the middle season of their life, and there's some kids in the room. And there's a handful of things that we all share in common. But one of those things is that we're all busy. In fact, if I were to ask any of you, how are you today? Chances are most of you, your first response would be, I'm busy. I've been running here, I've been running there. It's been a busy summer. We've got this going on and that going on. We're trying to get ready for vacation, which is supposed to be rest, and we're busy. We just got back from vacation, and so now I'm busy trying to catch up on all the things that I missed out on. We're all busy. What I've figured out is that we've been programmed to be busy since we were little kids. Think about it. When you were a little kid, or when your kids were little, and they said, or you said, Mom, I'm bored. What did Mom do? Gave them more chores to do. Right? And so as kids, we figure out pretty quickly that if I act like I'm busy, if I entertain myself, or if I occupy myself, or if I spend an extra 2 or 3 hours cleaning my room, then I'm not gonna get another chore to do. And so as kids, we figure out pretty quickly that we should stay busy. Well, then you go to school, and you know that person at school, maybe you were that person at school that would say to the teacher, Teacher, I've done all my work, and I don't have anything to do. And there's still 20 minutes left, right? You laugh. Some of y'all know that. You know that person, or some of you are that person, or were that person, right? So the teacher gives you more work, and then when you get out on the playground, everybody beats that kid up and encourages them, don't ever say you don't have anything to do again, right? We don't want more work because we're busy. We have to act like we're busy. When you're young and you start your working career, you might work in a restaurant. A lot of young people work in restaurants, and I got the opportunity to spend a few seasons in that area. And one of the things that we would say all the time is, if you're leaning, you're cleaning. And so you didn't want to not have anything to do. Otherwise, you were going to get the really terrible jobs. And so you were always busy. Then we get into adulthood, and we seem like we've attached busyness to success, or success to busyness. And so we constantly have to be busy. And the world has caught on to that. And the world begins producing ads that tell us that we're busy, or to encourage us to be busy, and to continue to remind us that we're busy. Even the TV industry adjusted its programming to attach itself to our busyness by making all of its programming on demand so that you could be as busy as you want to be. And then when you want to rest, whatever it is that you like to watch, they will have it then for you, right? Everything has pointed itself to our busyness. It's even worked its way into the music industry. And so many of you have probably heard this amazing statement by the theologian Randy Owens. And if you've heard that before, you can sing it along with me. I'm in a hurry to get things done. Oh, I rush and rush until life's no fun. All I got to do is live and die, but I'm in a hurry and don't know why. Now, the theology in that is terrible, but even the music industry communicates to us and points to us that we're busy. And that also works its way into church. We can get so busy in church doing things, even great things, even things that honor and glorify the Lord, and make ourselves too busy that we lose focus, we lose track of what it's all about. And so for this season, our church and our church leadership has very wisely said, hey, we would like to have a July Sabbath. Now that doesn't mean that we quit working for the month of July, but what it does mean is that we take some time to take a step back and to rest and to focus in on what's important. And so as a part of the July Sabbath, we have communicated that, hey, we're going to try to do no extracurricular activities at church in the month of July other than worship. And we want to gather together to worship. And I know that you recognize, but in order for us to have a Sunday morning here at Church at the Mill, there are hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that faithfully serve in order for us to be able to worship together. And so as you came in this morning, somebody was probably holding the door for you, and that was after you parked while somebody was outside in the heat helping you figure out where you could park your car, or somebody to bring you in on a golf cart so you didn't have to walk in that heat. And then when you got in here, somebody helped you find a seat, and that was after you got to go to the Good Tree Cafe and somebody with a smile made your latte with extra honey in it. And right now, as we sit here, there are incredible volunteers who are faithfully serving in our kids' ministry, who serve week in and week out to love on and care for our kids and to teach them the gospel so that we have the opportunity to worship together. And so to you who volunteer at a part of Church at the Mill, let me say thank you. If you're in the room because you're off today and you're serving capacity, let me say thank you. Thank you for what you do. And please know that the purpose of July Sabbath is to give us an opportunity to take a breath and to worship God together. This morning, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 20. So if you want to turn to Exodus chapter 20, and while you're turning there, I'm going to give a little background for this passage. The nation of Israel, which started out as a family, moved to Egypt because there was a famine. And while they were in Egypt, they grew really quickly. And Pharaoh noticed that they were growing really quickly and got nervous, and so he chose to put the nation of Israel, the family of Israel at that time, under bondage and slavery. And so they began to work for the people of Egypt. And Pharaoh worked them hard. And the people grew weary from being in slavery. And so they responded to Pharaoh and they said, Pharaoh, you're working us too hard. Please give us some time off. And Pharaoh said, hey, thanks for telling me that. You're going to work harder because of that. And so he began to work them even harder. And so God called Moses to go and say to Pharaoh, God has said, let my people go. And so Moses goes and he delivers the message. And after 10 plagues, you know the story, God rescues the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and he carries them across the Red Sea, and he carries them to Mount Sinai. And when he's at Mount Sinai, God establishes the relationship between him and the nation of Israel. And he begins with that by giving them the 10 Commandments. And so we know the 10 Commandments. I don't think there's anybody in the room that has not heard the 10 Commandments before. This morning, as we think about rest, what I'd love to do is to focus in on just one of those commandments. And that's in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8. And so if you'll look at it with me, I'm going to read from 8 to 11. It says this: "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." I think this passage answers 3 questions, and we'll look at just the standard who, what, when, where, why. And I want us to look at these 3 questions in regards to rest. The first question that we're going to look at is the question, what? I'm commanded to rest? I mean, with all the busyness that I do, you mean I should also rest? You see, we can think of a lot of things that are commanded of us. And when we talk about the 10 commandments, of course, the first ones that we highlight usually are thou shalt not murder, and thou shalt not lie, and thou shalt not steal. Very rarely do we pick up on this one, commandment number 4. But you see, this commandment is the longest of all the commandments. It's 108 words, far longer than any of the other commandments that are given to us. And he starts off the commandment not with a thou shalt not or don't do this. He starts with a positive statement, something that we are to do rather than something that we are not to do. He says, remember the Sabbath day. And so the very first word he uses there is for us to remember. Now, I don't know if this is true of you, but this is true of me. I have a hard time remembering things. In fact, my favorite app on my phone is my Reminders app. I go to my Reminders app all the time. In fact, the last time I looked, I think there's 600 and some reminders on my Reminders app. I need a Reminders app to remind me about my Reminders app, it seems like. But during the day, I might be in a conversation or I might think of something and I'll say, man, I don't want to forget that. Let me put that in my Reminders app. And I pull out my phone and I wake it up. And as soon as I wake it up, I see a notification on my phone that I've got a text message that I missed. And so I click on that text message and I read that text message and I respond back to them. And that makes me think of another text message I had. And so I go to that text message because I forgot to respond to that person. And so I send a response to them. And then I see that I got a social media notification. And so, man, I want to check that. And then, oh man, Trump did something else and that showed up on the news. And so I click on that. And 5 minutes later, I stop and I think, why did I pick my phone up again? Man, I don't remember what it was I was supposed to do. And so if you've ever texted me and I didn't send a message back to you, please know that it's because when I went to send a message back to you, I got distracted by something else and never actually followed through. We are constantly in need of reminders. And so God says to us at the very beginning of this verse, hey, it's important that you remember. Don't forget this. Don't lose sight of this. This is not something I want you to not do. This is something I want you to do. You need to remember. You need to remember the Sabbath day. Moses repeats the 10 commandments in Deuteronomy. He's at the end of his career at that point, and he's giving his farewell message to Israel. And so he wants them to remember these commandments. And so in Deuteronomy 5:12, which is almost word for word the same in the 10 commandments, but here's what it says about the Sabbath in Deuteronomy 5:12. It says, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. And I think looking at that word remember and looking at that word observe and putting them together, I think is a great way to communicate to us that what God says is that the Sabbath day is important. It's important enough for us to plan for it, and it's important enough for us to make sure we stick with it, that we don't let it fall into the bottom of our to-do list that never gets done. We should remember it so that we observe. He goes on to say that we should remember the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was the seventh day of the week. It was the day that God rested. And so they were to work 6 days, and then they were to observe Sabbath day. Sabbath means to cease labor, to not work. And so they should do that. Then it goes on to say that they should observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, to keep it holy. And of course, you know, when it says holy in Scripture, then that means it's set apart, that it's set apart. God is holy, which means he is set apart. And so we should set the Sabbath day apart from any other day, and it should look different, that it should be different than the other days that we observe. And so when we ask the question, what, I'm also commanded to rest, the answer to that is yes. We should remember and observe the Sabbath day, and we should keep it holy. That leads me to my second question, and that is how. How am I commanded to rest? How am I supposed to rest? Look at verse 9. He says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who's within your gates. And so what I want us to see first and foremost is that we are commanded to work. That we are commanded to work. You see, God created us for the purpose of working. In Genesis chapter 2, when it tells us the creation story, it says this in verse 15. The Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And so from the very beginning, when God created mankind, he gave us the responsibility of working. Now we know that in the creation story, it wasn't long before Adam and Eve sinned. And when they sinned, one of the punishments of sin is that work no longer was easy. In fact, in Genesis 3:17 through 19, it says this, and to Adam, he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you will return. You see, we were commanded to work before we were commanded to rest. We were commanded to work, and so work is for everyone. Work is a bigger category than just your paycheck or what you earn. So if you're in the room and you haven't begun a job yet that you earn a paycheck, there's still work for you to do. And so we are commanded to work, and we should work hard. And we should also not necessarily delegate out our work on this day, but it should be something that we work at. But I think part of our problem is that in our culture, we've become so lazy that we don't work hard, which impacts our rest. In fact, it was a statement by Eugene Peterson that I read this week that says this. It was a favorite theme of C.S. Lewis that only lazy people work hard. By lazily abdicating the essential work of deciding and directing, establishing values and setting goals, other people do it for us. Then we find ourselves frantically at the last minute trying to satisfy a half dozen different demands, none of which is essential to our vocation, to stave off the disaster of disappointing someone. You see, in order for us to rest well, we have to be willing to work hard. We have to be willing to work hard. In fact, in the passage, he says, do all of your work in 6 days. Or I'll translate that, do 7 days worth of work in 6 days. That you should be smart about your work and that you should work hard. Oftentimes, because we don't work hard or because of the challenges of work, we find ourselves in the ditch of laziness or sometimes in the ditch of workaholism. And we're constantly working. We let work bleed into all the other areas of our life. And before long, we're so busy working that our family's suffering, and we're so busy working the other areas are suffering. We're so busy working that our relationships are suffering. And we're so busy working that our spiritual relationship is suffering. The famous missionary Elizabeth Elliot said this: "Rest is a weapon given to us by God. The enemy hates it because he wants us to be stressed and occupied." And so it's important for us to rest. So when we ask the question, how am I commanded to rest? Three things I think that are important for us. Number one is that we should take time to actually rest. Take time to actually rest, that we should rest. The rest should be on the Sabbath day, and so that on that day we've actually taken time to put work aside and to say, hey, on this day I'm gonna focus on the things that God wants me to focus on. I'm gonna rest. The second thing I think it's important for us to do when we're commanded to rest is to reflect. It's important for us to contemplate, to think about what it is that we're supposed to do. It's easy for me to, when I look at this commandment, when it says to observe the Sabbath day, it's easy for me to see rest, and oftentimes I don't think about the fact of what it tells me that I'm supposed to reflect on, that I'm supposed to be focused on. Moses, in this section and also in Deuteronomy, he points to God resting in creation. In fact, he says in Genesis 2, 1 through 3, it says this: "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." And so we see that God rested. Now, God didn't need to rest. God rested as an example for us, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he did that so that we could follow his pattern. And so I think one thing we should reflect on when we think about the Sabbath day is we should reflect on God as our creator. God as our creator. You see, God created us to work, and he created us to create. And I think just like God stepped back and observed creation and observed that it was good and celebrated that, I think it's important for us to be able to take a step back and to celebrate what God has done through us over the course of the week. I don't know if this is true for you. Well, let me set this up by saying I hate yard work. I don't know if that's true for you. I don't have any problem with yard work. I'm okay at it. In fact, I even, for a season when I was in high school, worked for a landscaping company. And but I don't like it. Like, I just don't enjoy yard work. In fact, if you own a landscaping company, come talk to me. Maybe we can work out an agreement. I don't like to cut the grass. But you know, when I've cut the grass and I've edged it and I've trimmed around the bushes and I've made everything look very good, and then I go inside and I get cleaned up and I go back out and I get in my car and I back up, man, I usually just love to look at the yard and think, man, the yard looks really good. Good job, Andy. Way to go. Pat myself on the back, give myself a little honk of the horn and say, hey, great work, for about 2 days. And then, you know, it starts to grow and look a little scraggly again, and I gotta get back out there and cut it. It's important for us to take time to observe and celebrate the work that we've done, the work that God gave us the opportunity to do. And so we should reflect on God as our creator. But another thing that shows up in the commandments is that one of the reasons for the commandments was to tell us or to show us that we don't measure up. It was to remind us that we are sinners. And so when we look at the commandments, it's a reminder to us that God is our righteous judge. And so I think on our day of rest, I think it's important for us to take a step back and to remember and observe the fact that God is the Holy One and that we don't measure up to him. And it's important for us to look back and say, hey, where have I fallen short of the standard that God has for me this week? Where have I not faithfully served him? But then it also reminds us that God is our Redeemer. That God is our Redeemer. Of course, we know that the nation of Israel had been brought out of slavery, right? And they recognize, it's fresh on their minds, that God came to their rescue. And he brought them out of Egypt. And not only did he bring them out of slavery and out of Egypt, but they completely looted the Egyptians on their way out the door. And they carried all that stuff to the Red Sea, and they got to the Red Sea, and they had the Red Sea on one side, and they had an army that had changed their mind and were coming to get them on the other side. And God showed up and he split the Red Sea and he crossed them across the Red Sea on dry ground and rescued them again. So they come to Mount Sinai and they remember that God is their Redeemer, that he's redeemed them. And that's a reminder to us that we are a sinner, that we are separated from God. And there's nothing we can do to fix our sin. In fact, the only solution for your sin is death. And you don't come back from that. But God loved you so much that he sent his one and only son, Jesus Christ, who came, lived a perfect life, and then willingly sacrificed himself on a cross to pay for your sin and for my sin, and offers us the free gift of salvation if we would be willing to accept that free gift and choose to make him king of our life. And he redeemed us as well. If you're here this morning and that's the first time you've heard that story, or if you've never placed your faith and trust in Jesus, please, I encourage you, don't leave today without going to our prayer room and let someone walk you through how you can have a personal relationship with Jesus, because Jesus rescued us. And so as we rest, we should reflect on the fact that God is our Redeemer, that he redeemed us just like he redeemed Israel. And then the fourth thing I think it's important for us to reflect on is that God is returning, that he's coming back for us one day. And that one day, the joy that Adam and Eve first were able to experience before they sinned, that we'll get the opportunity to experience that as well. An unimpeded relationship with our Savior. And so we should celebrate what he's done in our life. And we should look forward to what's coming ahead. And so it's important for us to rest. It's important for us to reflect. I think it's also important for us to respond. You see, Sabbath, or a day of rest, is not just for rest, and it's not just to think about, reflect on what God's done, but it's important for us to respond to him. So here's 3 recommendations I have for you on how you can respond. One is you change your pace. In Exodus 20, he says that this day should be different, that it needs to be different, and so our pace should be different. It should look different. And so we should change our pace. We should take the opportunity to worship him, the opportunity to celebrate what he's done in our life and what he's going to do, and worship him. And I think it's important for us to serve him. That a day of rest should include time where we serve our King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so we talked about how we are commanded to rest. But let's talk about why. Why am I commanded to rest? Why is it important? You may say, hey, listen, all of that's Old Testament stuff. I mean, thanks for the Old Testament stuff, but I don't think we're supposed to live under the law anymore. And so is that really for me? Or you might say, are Christians still required to observe the Sabbath? I mean, is that really what we're supposed to do? There's a couple things I want us to see. Number one, I want us to see that God gave us an example all the way back in Genesis, and I'll look at it again, that God was the example for us, where he said, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, and on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. He blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. You see, God gives us the example of rest. He doesn't need to rest. He's the creator of the universe. He doesn't run out of energy. And yet he rested as an example for us. And I believe we don't see the commandment here in Genesis chapter 2 because Adam and Eve haven't sinned yet. And so he just shows us the example that we are to rest. But then we also see that he set up the pattern of Sabbath before he ever commanded the nation of Israel to have Sabbath. As the nation of Israel crosses over the Red Sea and they are on their way to the promised land. You may know the story. They get hungry and they say to Moses, Moses, we're hungry. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to feed ourselves? At least in Egypt, we had food. What are we supposed to do? And so Moses goes to God and says, hey, God, the people are complaining again. They're hungry. And so in Exodus chapter 16, verse 4 and 5, what we see is God provides food for them, but then he also establishes the pattern of the Sabbath for them. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portions every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. And on the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So I imagine the manna from heaven that he gave them was a lot like Krispy Kreme donuts. You know, when you get a donut fresh, Krispy Kreme donut fresh, I mean, it hits on a whole nother level, doesn't it? But after a day or so, it's not looking so great. It's not looking so great. And so the cool thing here is he sets the pattern up for them where on every morning they get up and they have food that God's provided for them. But on the sixth day, they collect extra because on Sabbath, they were to not collect any food. There wasn't gonna be any food for them to collect. And so he set up the pattern for them after he gave them the example. Then we go look at the New Testament because God highlighted the commandments in the New Testament as well. And so if we think about the fact that maybe these commandments don't apply to me today, we see that, no, the New Testament also tells us it's important. In the New Testament, Jesus, in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is being tested, and the religious leaders come to him and they think, man, I'm gonna trick Jesus. So I'm gonna ask him which one of the commandments is the greatest commandment, because if he says, thou shalt not lie, then we can ask him, what about this? And if he says, thou shalt love the Lord your God, you know, we should do this. And so they kind of had this set up. And so they said, Jesus, hey, what is the greatest commandment? Let me read the verse, I'm sorry. It says, teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus responds to them in verse 37. It says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And so Jesus sums up the first four commandments in that statement. The first four commandments were pointed towards God. They were all directives between our relationship with God. And so he says, hey, let me sum up these four commandments in this one statement. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's a summary of commandments 5 through 10. All of those commandments are directed at our relationship with each other. And so he says, hey, this is also important. And then he makes this statement in verse 40. On these two commandments depend all of the law and the prophets. You see, Jesus summed up or wrapped up the entire law and the 10 commandments in two statements. Love God and love others. And if you're willing to do that, then everything else will work itself out. And so he highlights the fact that this commandment to Sabbath is important. Then he goes on and he says in Luke chapter 16 and verse 15, he says something very interesting. And this is a theme throughout Jesus' teaching when he was on earth. And that is that the commandments are not so much about what we do, but about our heart. Listen to what he says in Luke 16:15. You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. So we can look at the Sabbath and we can say to the Sabbath, about the Sabbath, yeah, that was an Old Testament thing. I don't think I need to do that anymore. It's different now. But God reminds us that these commandments are not so much about what we do, but about our heart relationship with God. And so it's important that we focus on him. One more passage in the New Testament I want you to see is in Mark chapter 2. In Mark chapter 2, Jesus is talking and he is answering a question about the Sabbath. That was oftentimes a place where the religious leaders like to attack Jesus. And he goes back to a passage from 1 Samuel chapter 21 when David actually gets food for his soldiers during Sabbath. He says this. He said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he also gave it to those who were with him." And this is what it said about Jesus. "And Jesus said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord even of the Sabbath.'" You see, the goal and the focus of Sabbath is for us. It's what God has given to us and what he's told us or commanded us that, hey, we need to observe this because it is God's gift to us. It was made for us, not made for a set of rules for us to follow. Of course, we know in the New Testament that after Jesus rose again on a Sunday, that we began celebrating the Lord's Day. And so we switched from the last day of the week to the first day of the week, from the day of Sabbath to the Lord's Day. But the principle remained the same. It's important that we gather to worship on the Lord's Day. And that's an important part of what we do. You see, Sabbath is for your relationship with God. The day of rest is for your relationship with God. I worked at a camp for a number of years, and the camp would run from Saturday to Saturday. Campers would leave on a Saturday morning, and we would turn the camp over, get it all ready, and then a new set of campers would arrive on Saturday afternoon. And at that camp, we were there on Sunday. It was the first full day of camp, and they observed Sabbath. And it was, if you think about camp, which is always high energy and lots of activities and a ton of fun, and we didn't do any of that stuff on Sabbath. And it was the most boring day. I used to think, what are we doing? And so we would get creative with ways that we could entertain hundreds and hundreds of campers on the Sabbath day. And so you might ask yourself, yeah, but what am I allowed to do? In fact, oftentimes when we look at laws, we try to draw the line and say, what is the line so that I can get as close to the line as I possibly can get to? But the better question is, how can I maximize one day of the week for the Lord? If he's given me this day, if it's a gift to me, and he's told me that I should celebrate him on this day, how can I maximize that time with him? And so the Sabbath day ought to be about God. It ought to be about God. Look at verse 11 there in Exodus 20. He says, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." You see, I think what that passage is trying to tell us is that God will bless us if we'll spend a day devoted to him. And all of you, again, are in different situations in life. And some of you might have had to wrangle a handful of kids to get them here to church. And it didn't feel a whole lot like Sabbath on your way here. And some of you got a work call while you were sitting in the seat. And even though you're supposed to be off from work, somebody is already trying to get you to be involved in work. And some of you, it just seems like there's more to do than you've got time to do it. You say, I don't have time to give a day off. I don't have time to give a day back to the Lord. But the promise is that God will bless you if you choose to rest and celebrate him. I don't know how he'll bless you. I can't promise you what that will look like. I just know that it says that he will bless you. But not only will he bless you, but I think God will bless the people around you as well. You see, I think part of what God is communicating here and why he told these people that nobody else in their orbit were to work, even the visitor that came to visit them, is because God wanted other people to see what he's done in your life as a part of Sabbath. And so he says to them, hey, I want you to do this day and I will bless you, but I'll also bless the people around you. I'm sure you know this story, but in 1946, Truett Cathy owned a little restaurant called the Dwarf Grill. It was called the Dwarf Grill because it was really, really small. And it was positioned really close to the Ford manufacturing plant, and 24 hours a day it was open. And people would come in and they would eat in that restaurant. And it was there at the Dwarf Grill that Truett Cathy tried to figure out and work out how he could fry a chicken breast and put it on bread. In fact, he goes on later on to say that he didn't invent the chicken, just the chicken sandwich. And of course, he figured it out. It was a certain type of pressure fryer, and he found a good solution. He began making this chicken sandwich, and it blew up. It got really popular. So popular that he decided that he was going to create a separate type of restaurant, and that he was going to put Chick-fil-A into the mall as one of the food court vendors in the mall. But you see, in 1946, Truett Cathy was convicted of something. He felt like his employees needed a Sabbath. If he was going to take a Sabbath, they should have a Sabbath as well. And so he began closing his restaurant on Sunday. And it was going to be closed the entire day. Families could celebrate with their family. They could go to worship together, and they were going to be closed. And so when he went to talk to the Greenbrier Mall in Atlanta, Georgia, about putting a Chick-fil-A in their food court, they said no. And here's why they said no: because they're open on Sunday. In fact, they're pretty busy on Sunday. And they said, hey, we're not going to give the space up to a restaurant that's not going to be open on Sunday. So as they began to talk back and forth, Chick-fil-A and Greenbrier Mall, Truett Cathy made this promise. He said, hey, listen, I promise you that we'll do enough business in 6 days that it'll be worth you being open. So they did. They let Chick-fil-A open up a restaurant. They took a chance. And sure enough, almost immediately, Chick-fil-A made more money in 6 days than any of the other vendors in the Greenbrier Mall made in 7 days. And so now, Truett Cathy had a model that he could point back to and say, hey, listen, I promise you, let us be open 6 days. It'll be worth your business at your mall. And they became very popular in the malls, and then they began opening up restaurants. And over the years, Truett Cathy has taken a lot of heat, and the Chick-fil-A Corporation has taken a lot of heat, but they've maintained the conviction that they're going to be open 6 days and not 7. And you know, if you look at a list of the top grossing, the top restaurants in their area, Chick-fil-A is routinely first or close to first, even being closed one of those days. And I believe it's because God blesses them. That God blesses them for being willing to say, hey, we're going to take a day of rest. And so I think that should be true of us. But if we look at our lives, we know that our calendar and our bank statement reveal where our priorities are. And so the question for us is, do the rhythms of our life display a love for God? And as you look at your life, I want to encourage you this morning to just evaluate, how can I structure and change my week so that I can spend time resting with God? So what can you change in your schedule to intentionally take time to rest with God this week? No doubt that's going to look different for all of us. The second question I want you to think about is, what do you need to do to build a healthy rhythm of Sabbath? See, I encourage you that every day that you spend time with God, every day, reading His Word and talking to Him and allowing Him to pour into your life. But I think it's also important for us once a week to take a step back and to rest and to focus on God for one day. But I think it's also important for us, maybe quarterly, maybe every 6 months, maybe yearly, to take some time and to evaluate what God's doing in our life so that we can rest, so that we can worship, so that we can serve Him. If you'll bow your heads and close your eyes, I want to encourage you not to leave today without asking yourself this question: what can I change in my life so that I can rest better? Gracious Lord, I thank you so much that you loved us enough that you would create a relationship with us, or you create an opportunity for us to have a relationship with you. But Lord, I thank you so much that you would also give us the opportunity to work hard for you and the opportunity to be able to just focus on and rest with you. And Lord, I pray for the individuals that are in this room this morning. Lord, I pray that as we get into the month of July, and for many of us probably think, man, summer's already half over and there's still so much I have to accomplish. Lord, I pray that we could make a priority in our life, time to rest with you. And Lord, I pray that you'll bless it like you promised to. And Lord, we thank you for the opportunity for it. In your name I pray, amen. Thank you so much for being here this morning. It was a joy, and go and rest well this week.